Chapter 298. 4. Danger averted. Problem unraveled over that deep chasm. Just one single shaky and tottering iron chain bridge could be seen, and down below in the deep pit, a countless number of those strange human head-eating birds circled. It seemed like their nests sat down within that deep gorge, and they would come out to attack when someone went near. Everyone could not help but feel a chill run down their spine. Sweet heavens! Those people were really digging their own graves just now. Who could have thought that such a treacherous scene was hidden right behind those steps? It was such a close shave for the rest of them. The shiny glass steps were clearly meant to bedazzle their eyes, intentionally set out to disillusion all of them, and to hide the danger immediately after. But for someone to be able to see through such a devious scheme, and decide to destroy the steps completely, that allowed everyone to realize the trickery, that was something not to be sniffed at. But it was also clear that the young girl was not the person who saw through that treacherous trick. Everyone had seen that young girl trotting back happily towards a man, seemingly asking for praise. The man had then lowered his eyes to look at the young girl, and said something to her, which made the young girl beam, and her eyes turn into two smiling crescents. The man had a tall, slender figure, his body lean and mean, but what was most eye-catching was that icy, aloof demeanor of his, and that head of silver hair glistening white as snow. The man lifted his eyes indifferently, his deep green eyes making the man seem he did not carry a single sliver of emotion in him, uninhibitedly callous and cold. But the innate air of nobility surrounding his person made people feel that he was being haughty or arrogant, but that he was born to be a man like that. Just who was this divine entity? Why has nothing about this man been spoken of before? Qing Tianlin watched the scene with an imperceptible smile on his face, and then turned to walk over under Zhuge Xiong's suspicious gaze. It's been so long, Lord Vice Coalition Chief. Why is the Evil Purgers Coalition here to join the fray here at the Mine Free Peak? Qing Tianlin asked with a smile on his face. Qing Yili had noticed the man earlier, but he did not want to bother himself with the man. Seeing that Qing Tianlin had taken the initiative to approach him, he could naturally no longer pretend that he had not seen the man. His voice was cold as he said, "If you can come, I would naturally have a bigger right to." "Haha, of course you can." Qing Tianlin threw his head back and laughed. "It is after all different now than in the past, where you have found and acknowledged your roots, and your status has been greatly elevated. So it is only natural that act a little more arrogant now." Impetuous curl. Little Yen standing at the side could not help but crease up her brows, her face unfriendly as she stared at the man. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She still remembers this man. It's the family head she saw back when they went to the Feng family. Although she did not know why the man would be here. But to think that he could be so disrespectful to her young lord, just because they are in a different place now. Looks like the Feng family no longer wants to have a place to stand in the White Finlands anymore. However, Qing Yili raised a hand up, signaling for her to stand down. Seeing that, little Yen could not help but clenched her jaws, as she walked off to the side in indignance. Qing Tianlin curved his lips up in a smile, and took a couple of steps to go closer to the man. In a voice that only the two of them could hear, he then said, "Have you come here to the Mine Free Peak as well because—" Chapter 299. 1. Little ball of coal that foolishly revealed itself. The irises in Qing Yili's eyes contracted intensely for an instant, because the man had leaned in close to whisper softly to him. "Could it be it is because you know Qing is up there, and you immediately came rushing here, because you smelled her aura? What did you say?" Qing Yili's face immediately turned dark, his dark green eyes watching the man intently. Why would Qing Yi be in the Mine Free Peak? That look seemed to have decided that it must have something to do with this man standing before him. Qing Tianlin raised an eyebrow, the expression on his face innocent as he shrugged his shoulders. "I'm being so wrongfully accused here. I have not done anything at all. And if I am able to discover how special Qing is, others will naturally be able to do the same thing as well, right?" "You are certain of that?" Qing Yili grabbed Qing Tianlin's collar in his hand, and said in an icy voice, "If you already know that, why did you not go save her? Haven't you always pursued Qing Yi relentlessly? Now that she has fallen into someone else's hands, how could you still remain completely unmoved? Upon seeing that sinisterly rage-filled face on that man with his collar gripped in the man's hand, Qing Tianlin did not get angry, but instead maintained a harmless smile as he pried the man's finger open one by one. What are you getting so worked up for? Am I not here now? Qing will only belong to me and me alone, so before I am able to make her mine, she will not lose even a single hair on her head. After Qing Tianlin finished saying that, he then cast a meaningful glance at the man in front of him for a while, before he walked right past the man. Behind him, Qing Yili clenched his fists up tightly as he cast his gaze upon the structure suspended in midair ahead, a complicated expression flashing briefly across his face for an instant. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Although the issue of the glass steps that had killed a number of them has been unraveled, but the deep chasm that came to be revealed after that posed to be another big headache for everyone. Besides the fact that the narrowly thin iron chain bridge could only allow one person to cross at a time, there were those strange birds eyeing them vivaciously. Even if they were able to kill off the birds they saw, who knew how many more of them were hidden from sight? Humans were different from beasts after all, as their strength and spirit powers would come to run out. If that happened while they were still on that bridge, they would quickly succumb to exhaustion before being killed. Despite all the clamor happening outside, Lu Junyao had remained stoically silent on his side. Among all the people there, the Dark Lands had preserved their strength, and they were probably the strongest might present. "My lord, when are we going to make a move?" one of the Dark Lands disciples asked in a soft voice. Chapter 299. 2. Little ball of coal that foolishly revealed itself. Lu Jun Yao had a hand holding the tent's flap, and was watching the scene outside. Upon hearing that, he swept his gaze over all of them and said, "Who among you would like to go scout for a way in?" There wasn't a ripple in the tone of that voice, and not a single sliver of emotion could be heard from it. But for those who have been around that man for a good while, they would have come to know the man's habits somewhat, and they were able to detect a little bit of unusualness in his voice. A bunch of fools from the Hunters Guild had gone out to scout for a way in earlier, but not a single person had come back. The Overlord had not made any moves back then, because he wanted those pompous conceited fools to help him test the waters first, keeping the Dark Lands numbers untouched. It seems like the Overlord has it all planned out. Based on the Mind-Free Peaks ways seen here, I think it will be a good 2 weeks, if we are going to wait till all these people manage to find their way up there. Leaning back lazily in a corner of the tent, Little Monster suddenly chirped softly. Seeing Lu Junyao's gaze turning onto him, Little Monster curved up the ends of his lips, and his scarlet-red eyes narrowed. By that time, that little lass of yours would probably be about done with her modifications. You have an idea in mind? Lu Junyao raised an eyebrow to look at him. Little Monster's lips curved up slightly, and right before several other pairs of equally inquisitive eyes locked on him, his body suddenly whizzed out of the tent at the speed of light, moving like a whirlwind, and went across that long drooping iron chain bridge in a blink, before coming back into the tent with that same speed. His body had moved so fast that it was impossible for the naked eye to capture any of it, and his actions had gone by unnoticed. It had not even taken a breath's time, and he had already gone back and forth across that iron chain bridge, and the iron chains of both sides of that bridge had not even wobbled all that much. Everyone from the Dark Lands was speechless. Just what was Little Monster made of? How could he possibly possess such heaven-defying abilities? That feat not only called for one's agility while moving at such a speed, but required a lot of technique as well. If the iron chain bridge had shook, those strange birds below the bridge would have sensed him and attacked him together at once. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Unless one was truly as light as a feather. Lu Junyao stared silently at the laid-back and nonchalant man. Is that the idea you had in your head? Are you kidding me? Throughout the entire realm, how many people could move at that kind of a speed like him? If everyone was as heaven-defying as him, then how chaotic would it have been? Hearing those words, Little Monster arched up an eyebrow. I was merely saying that I can cross over like that. Lu Junyao's eyes narrowed slightly, but his face was otherwise expressionless as he looked at the man. Chapter 299. 3. Little ball of coal that foolishly revealed itself. All right. I was just joking. Don't get so tense. Little monster laughed softly, and then continued to say, all spirit beasts have their own natural predators. The strong prey on the weak. Survival of the fittest is the natural order of things. One reason those strange birds have entrenched themselves there in that gorge is firstly, because it is a natural habitat for them. And the second reason is because no predator has appeared in there to prey on them. I don't think we brought any powerful spirit beasts with us this time. Should we get someone to bring one out from the Darklands? Sun Luo opened his mouth to ask. Little monster let out a scoffing laugh. No one besides our overlord himself is able to bring out any of those spirits beasts in our forbidden grounds. That's true. Sun Luo then gave his shoulders a helpless shrug. How could he have actually forgotten that? And they could not possibly ask the overlord himself to make a trip back. Besides Lu Junyao, Qingbei was not on familiar terms with any of these people, unable to converse more than a few words with them. Hence, he was just sitting quietly by the side, his mind trying to think of a way to deal with the situation, when he suddenly felt a light tug pulling at the corner of his robes. He instinctively lowered his head to look, but did not see anything there, and did not pay it much mind. But a short while later, the corner of his robes was pulled on again. He quickly turned to look down once more, puzzlement creasing up his brows. What is going on? Did he just imagine that? Uncle Little Bei. A very soft voice sounded in Qingbei's ears, and he could not help but feel rather startled. This voice, before he could think any further about it, he saw Little Monster on the other side suddenly narrow his eyes, and his scarlet eyes were scathing as he turned to stare over at Qingbei. Whatever you are, show yourself. The tugging at the corner of his robes suddenly stopped, and something within that seemingly empty space seemed to be frantically trying to slip away. Unfortunately, just as it was about to rush its way out of the tent, a swath of purple cloth suddenly blocked its way forward. Ouchie! It hurts! Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. A little puerile-sounding voice yelped pitifully in pain, as an unidentifiable black ball crashed to the ground with a thud. It was probably because of its overly rotund body that it went on to roll several times around, resulting in a highly comical sight. Qingbei was the first person to turn and look. What he saw immediately caused his eyes to widen in surprise. Meatball. Upon hearing that, the little fella climbed to its feet, its large azure eyes blinking as it looked pitifully at Qingbei. Uncle, it's really you. Qingbei went over and scooped the little fella up into his arms, his demeanor quickly becoming excited. How did you come to appear here? You have never left Qingyu's side before, have you? Chapter 299. 4. Little ball of coal that foolishly revealed itself. Seeing that scene unfold, Lu Junyao could not help but feel a little puzzled. What is going on here? Little Monster was the one who opened his mouth first. This is... When he heard that, Qingbei then remembered something important. He immediately turned to Lu Junyao and said, This is a spirit pet that Qingyu brought back from the time when we went to Hades Canyon, and it has not left Qingyu's side ever since. I think that Qingyu must have sent it out to come look for us. Lu Junyao then turned his gaze onto the black little beast in Qingbei's arms and said in a deep voice, Did she ask you to come? Meatball shrank back from the man. For some unknown reason, Meatball was fearful of this man, and it because this man had blocked its escape just now that caused it to be revealed to everyone here. Its eyes then unconsciously swiveled to the side, to look at Little Monster, who was looking at it with equal curiosity. Its tiny mouth stiffened up, thinking that these two men who were staring at it with strange looks in their eyes felt rather terrifying. The entire time that it had passed through the large and myriad crowd out there, not a single person had discovered its presence. In the end, it had just come in here for a little while, and it was immediately found out. That moment that the little beast hesitated in its terrified daze, the man seemed to lose a little bit of his patience when his violet eyes turned a deeper shade, and the surrounding air felt like it was freezing up. Meatball snapped right back to its senses, quickly nodding its head. Mother told me to come see what things are like out here. And to come tell Uncle here that she is all safe and well. The little fellow was quite intelligent, knowing how to read the situation. Seeing that the man's face did not seem right, it immediately blurted out the truth. But it had just finished saying those words when Lu Junyao's face turned even stranger as he asked, "You call her mother?" "Yep. She is my mother after all." Meatball's delicately beautiful face beamed proudly, as it nodded its head adorably. Lu Junyao then raised his head up slightly. "I am then father." Uft. Sun Luo, who had been watching the conversation between man and beast in amazement, suddenly burst out laughing, before he could hold himself back. Little Monster curved up the corners of his lips, and although he did not laugh out loud, the expression on his face was one of unmistakable mirth and amusement. But the most astounded one among them all would of course be none other than the little beast itself. Its large limpid eyes staring wide with shock, it seemed to be slowly digesting the news it just heard. "All right, back to what's most important. How is she doing? Is she hurt?" Lu Junyao opened his mouth to ask. "Mother isn't hurt. She is imprisoned in a certain place, and the artifact used to hold her is very special, so she is unable to free herself from it." Lu Junyao's brows creased up. "Looks like he has to go up there as quickly as possible. Where did we just stop earlier?" "All right. Go back to the Dark Lands to bring a high-leveled spirit beast to intimidate those strange birds down in the gorge, or they might pose to be quite a problem." Sun Luo opened his mouth to say, "No need to go to so much trouble. We have a ready one right here." Little Monster curved up his lips in a smile, and said softly, "Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." "Iyuha?" Sun Luo was taken aback for a moment, and it took him another half a heartbeat before he was able to react to what the guy just said. His eyes turned slowly inch by inch towards the tiny adorable palm-sized little ball of coal cradled in Qingbei's arms. A twitch tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Are you pulling my leg here?" At that size, it might not even be enough to fill the gap between the teeth of those strange birds, you know? Sensing the doubt in Sun Luo's eyes, Little Monster could not help shaking his head as he looked at the adorable little beast still licking its paw and said, "That just shows how ignorant you are." Chapter 301, God-Assisted Strike. In the text titled Strange Creatures of the Lands, a mysterious ferocious beast was once recorded. It was said it had resplendent eyes that glittered like seas of stars, beautiful and captivating, its face delicate and exquisitely good-looking, a leading species among spirit beast types. They are born with the capability to assume two forms, in order to protect themselves and to confuse their enemies when they are spotted. They are completely black in the day, and they turn white as snow when night falls. Because they are tiny in size, they seem frail and weak. But once they switch into battle mode, their powers and the size of their bodies will change according to their age. They are highly powerful, and very few spirit beast species are their match. Naturally, other spirit beasts would not dare to take the initiative to antagonize them, as a spirit beast's vindictiveness is directly proportional to the amount of power they possess. Speaking up to that point, Little Monster's voice came to pause for a moment as his eyes slowly turned to gaze upon the wary face on the little ball of coal on the opposite side. He smiled slightly and then asked the little fella, "I am not wrong, am I? Your true form is actually called the Dark Phantasm Spirit Cat." Right after Little Monster's words came out, Qingbei could clearly felt the little coal ball in his arms suddenly seem like its fur was bristling, its entire body highly tense, and unbelievably sharp claws were sticking out from its tiny fleshy paws out of the blue, looking like it was about to attack someone. "You'd better keep those claws away quickly. If you happen to scratch that kid accidentally, you are going to be skinned alive when you go back to your mother." Little Monster curved up his lips almost imperceptibly in a smile and said, "Not only do the Dark Phantasm Spirit Cat species possess frightfully strong attack power, their bodies are filled with poison. The poison most lethal at their fangs and claws where the slightest scratch on human skin would bring instantaneous death. Not even the most powerful elixir cultivator in the world will be able to save them." Hearing those words, Qingbei's lips stiffened up at the corners, his eyes looking at Meatball filled with shock and trepidation. Sweet gods, this little fella here is actually such a dangerous creature? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He had frequently teased the little fella so savagely in the past, thinking that it was so cute and fun to play with. Thinking back about it, the little fella had really been quite tolerant with him. If it had just gotten a little impatient with him in the slightest back then, and stuck a single claw into him, that might very well have been the end of him. How did you discover what I truly am? It came from that same tiny little body, its voice just as puerile and adorable sounding as a little child's. But at that moment, Meatball's gaze seemed to have suddenly changed, its large eyes filled with fierce savage bloodlust, its tiny mouth slightly curled up in a snarl, to reveal the long fangs that glistened with a chilling sheen. That species were creatures born with a strong innate bloodthirstiness, but as they were really able to hide it very well with their small and petite size, together with their beautiful and attractive outlook, a seemingly adorable and harmless little thing, people easily let down their guard against these creatures, many ending up being devoured till not even any of their bones were left. Chapter 302. God-assisted strike. It was rumored that they were more cold-blooded and devious than snakes, and humans have never been able to take them down. Where they had not just failed in capturing these mystical spirit beasts, countless have fallen prey to them. Seeing the fierce, snarling little creature before him, Little Monster quickly laughed reassuringly and said, "No need to get so tensed up. We are all good guys here." Pfft, Sun Luo could not help but burst out laughing. Which part of you here looks like a good guy? Being made fun of like that, Little Monster merely scoffed contemptuously, and then said in a scathing voice, "If being more good-looking than you means being a bad guy, then I'll admit it readily." The smile on Sun Luo's face froze up, and then decided to clamp his mouth shut, and not say anything more. Fine. He doesn't want to speak to people with such a venomous tongue anyway. He will choke on that tongue of his one fine day. Ignoring the back-and-forth squabbling between those two people, Lu Junyao slowly took a couple of steps closer, and looked at the little fella, who was watching him with large wary eyes before he said softly, "I need your help." Meatball's eyes blinked a few times, seemingly puzzled. Lu Junyao raised a finger and pointed at the spot where a crowd of people were gathered around and said, "Those spirit beasts at the bottom of the gorge in front are blocking our way. The fastest solution for us now is to have you go deal with them." "Why should I listen to you?" Meatball said with an unfriendly glint in its eyes. Born innately haughty and arrogant, their pride inviolable, that seemed to be a common characteristic all spirit beasts shared. So when it heard that commanding tone in the man's voice, Meatball was immediately indignant. Mother is the one and only person who can boss it around. Anybody else? Don't even dream about it. With that thought in mind, Meatball even went on to bare its fangs at the man. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Seeing that, Lu Junyao raised an eyebrow, and then opened his mouth to say, "The sooner we are rid of these obstacles, we will then be able to go rescue Qing Yu earlier. Do you really want to see her suffer all that torture in the mine-free peak?" No matter how disgruntled and indignant it felt, after hearing the man's words, Meatball could do nothing but give in. Who asked it to care for Mother so much? Immediately, Meatball jumped off from Qing Bei's arms, its tiny body appearing in the very next instant upon the iron chain bridge that swayed gently under the gusts of wind blowing up from the bottom of that deep chasm. Sun Luo stared, his eyes wide with surprise as he said with awe in his voice, "That little creature's speed is actually quite a bit faster than Little Monster's just now." Little Monster's moves he had shown just now had already stunned many of their eyes, but the speed of the dark phantasm cat was so fast that it was just terrifying. It was feared that even the hurricane hawk that was well known for its incredible speed among spirit beasts was not even half as quick. Chapter 303. God-assisted strike. Upon hearing those words, Little Monster smiled knowingly and said, "One of the dark phantasm cat's greatest strengths is its speed, and it is because they are born with these innate heavenly bestowed superior traits over other regular spirit beasts that cause them to be so haughty and proud. You really know quite a bit about them. To think that you will know so much about such a strange and rare species." Having said that, Sun Luo just could not help but turn to look curiously at little monster. Speaking of that little monster, it seems like I still do not know where you came from. And everyone just calls you little monster without knowing your real name. It is all really just so mysterious. So where did you originate from? The expression on little monster's face looked a little taken aback, like he had not expected that Sun Luo would suddenly ask him such a question. But a short moment later, he came back to his senses and his scarlet red eyes looked like there was water rippling within, looking extremely attractive. His face looked a little mischievous as he asked, "Why don't you take a guess?" "Boring." Sun Luo scoffed, showing disinterest. But he knew that little monster was probably unwilling to talk about that, and he did not probe any further. At that moment, the sky outside was gradually darkening, and the final slivers of light, just before sunset, was gradually fading. The moment that the sun's rays faded off completely, Meatball's outlook then underwent its change. Hence, a fluffy snowy white creature suddenly came to appear on the iron chain bridge, its contrasting color highly conspicuous against the darkness, causing everyone's eyes to turn wide with surprise. What is that thing? It must be some spirit pet someone brought along with them, isn't it? To think that such a tiny spirit pet actually exists. But they should have kept a closer watch on it, and not let it run all the way up there on its own. That ignorant little fella is a newborn calf, who isn't afraid of the tiger. With so many of those strange carnivorous birds down there, that tiny little head it has would not even be enough to fill up the gap between their teeth. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You're absolutely right. But when did it manage to make its way up there? All of us have been watching the bridge all this time, and we did not see it climb its way up. When Meatball heard those ignorant humans debating back and forth about it, it could not help having a contemptuous smile come to show on its face. If it wasn't because it wanted to save Mother, it would not be doing something to benefit these fools for nothing. It would just let them go get eaten up by these birds here, for even daring to look down on it. But it being able to intimidate those birds down there was one thing. Whether these fools are capable of making it across is another thing altogether. Just as everyone was locked in incessant debate and discussion, they saw the body of the little creature on the iron chain bridge suddenly start to emit a soft faint glow, before the light suddenly flared out and started to spread. Chapter 300. For God-assisted strike. Before anyone in the crowd could even react to what the little creature was doing, they immediately heard a series of shrill piercing shrieks break out from deep inside the chasm, the sound reverberating in their ears, sounding like it was some sort of sound attack, almost rupturing their eardrums. What was that sound? What just happened? My ears. Arg, it hurt so much. In an instant, painful wails broke out over the top of the chasm, incessant and unending. Everyone quickly clamped their hands hard over their ears, but that did not help them in the slightest. Those unbearably ear-piercing high-pitched shrieks struck directly onto their eardrums, the sound assaulting them relentlessly, and a good number of the weaker people among them had blood streaming out from their 7 orifices, their ears bleeding the most, as their injury was most severe there. Little Monster seemed to have expected that this was going to happen. When Meatball was standing up there on the iron chain bridge, he had already asked everyone on their side to seal up their ears. Hence, no matter how wretched the situation was for the people outside, it was uneventful and peaceful here in the Darklands tent. It was as if they were merely uninvolved spectators witnessing the scene before them. What is that little fella up to? A corner of Sun Luo's mouth twitched as he said, "Isn't he supposed to go deal with those spirits beasts down there? Why does it seem like it has enraged those strange birds, and is now surrounded and being maniacally attacked by all of them at the same time? It has not been surrounded, but is just pitting itself against them." Little Monster then said in explanation. Sun Luo nodded his head in understanding, and then continued to ask, "But will that little fella really be a match for that entire flock of strange birds? It is after all alone by itself, and those strange birds could number by the thousands and thousands." Little Monster smiled faintly. "It is time you see what kind of power the dark phantasm cat really holds." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although it looked like it was just a kitten, It was a spirit beast that was more violent and dangerous than any tiger or panther. As the sound of his voice trailed off, the soft light surrounding the little figure on the iron chain bridge was then seen to grow more and more intense, its body growing an inch at a time. Gradually, it grew to become the size of a small elephant, its body a few hundred times its original size. Qingbei stared as the little beast transformed, and he could not help but say incredulously, "So Meatball can turn itself to become so big. It is merely in its infancy now. Wait till it grows up and matures, and it will be bigger in size." Little Monster responded with a smirk. As Qingbei was still stunned and overwhelmed with awe, the spirit beast on the iron chain bridge suddenly let out a rage-filled roar and gave its foot a stomp to stir up all the countless strange birds down below in the deep chasm. Chapter 301. 1. A person impossible to forget, but what caused everyone's faces to turn pale was that all those strange birds that flew up from the bottom of the gorge did not attack the spirit beast on the bridge, but just gathered together in flocks as they stuck themselves onto both sides of that narrow bridge, which came to increase the surface area over the iron chain bridge by quite a bit. What is going on here? Someone could not help but query. Have those birds been possessed? Looking at the situation, it seemed like the strange birds were using their own bodies to become part of the bridge that will allow people to cross quickly. There were just too many people there, and looking at the iron chain bridge, it seemed highly aged and should have hung there for a very, very long time. If they were to cross that bridge one at a time, not to mention how long that would that. The bridge itself might possibly fail to withstand their weight on it for such a long period, and just snap. Seeing the crowd of people hesitating and not daring to move forward, Meatball then waved its hind paw a little impatiently, before it shot its gaze into a certain direction, like it was trying to hint at something. That was when Lu Junyao and his people finally came to reveal themselves. There was no doubt that wherever this man appeared, there would be no peace. It's the Dark Overlord. When did he get here? As voices rose in heated debate, the front of the bridge that had been blocked with clusters of people suddenly opened up, as people stepped aside unconsciously, to make way for the man who showed up suddenly. I see this fellow wherever I go. How infuriating. The shade on Zhuge Xiong's face was not pretty, especially when he saw that high and mighty demeanor of the man, acting like everyone around him was a level lower than him. And Zhuge Xiong's heart just could not help but feel indignant. In the past, back when he was still in the Dark Lands, he had greatly admired the man, and held a deep respect for him. But now, there was nothing but only hatred and contempt in his heart for Lu Junyao. Qing Tianlin standing beside Zhuge Xiong heard that, and the look in his eyes changed a little, before he asked Zhuge Xiong with interest in his voice. That man is? Although he had traded blows with this man a few times before, he still did not know a thing about the man's real identity till today, but just that he was not a simple person, a highly mysterious individual. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. He is the Lord of the Dark Lands, one of the powers among Cloud Heaven's 5 great powers, Lu Junyao. An insufferably conceited, unbelievably haughty and arrogant man. Zhuge Xiong replied in a disdainful voice. Oh. Qing Tianlin smiled as he nodded his head. So he is the highly famed great overlord of the Dark Lands. Zhuge Xiong scoffed coldly. It's all just his great infamy. Qing Tianlin merely smiled, and did not say anything. Lu Junyao's face was indifferent and expressionless as he strode past those people, slowly stepping onto the iron chain bridge. Chapter 301. 2. A person impossible to forget at that same moment. Meatball was also slowly turning back into the tiny ball that it was originally. As it sat there with its head lowered while licking its paws, a long slender arm suddenly stretched out to scoop it up, scaring the little beast so much that the fur on its body bristled immediately, its large azure eyes wide as it stared at the man in surprise. Lu Junyao then seemed to crook up a corner of his lips faintly in a smile, and then stroked the soft fur on the back of the little fella's neck as he said, "That must have been rather hard on you." The soft tender voice, and the gentle action of his hand, actually came to make the little beast feel a little flustered. completely forgetting to slash this human with a vicious claw that had come to touch its body without seeking its permission. Aside from Mother, it had not really liked even Qing Bei, whom it saw day in day out, to get too close to it. It was only for Mother's sake that it had allowed him to touch and carry it occasionally. But this man, strangely, it was not feeling repulsive. Could it be because that it could detect a sliver of Mother's scent on this man? After everyone from the Dark Lands were seen to have made it safely across the Iron Chain Bridge, all the other people would naturally not want to fall behind, and they immediately wanted to follow suit. Just as about half of them managed to make it across, for some unknown reason, the strange birds that had lined themselves to become an extension of the bridge suddenly turned wild and flapped their wide wings violently, which caused a number of people standing on their backs to fall over. And when those people went plummeting down into the deep chasm, the strange birds at the bottom immediately surged straight towards them in flocks. The very next instant, the stench of blood could be smelled in the air, and there was no sign of those people who fell over anywhere left to see. It was only because they had been intimidated by the dark phantasm cat that those birds had been so docile. And by that time, Lu Junyao had already walked a great distance away with the little beast held in his arms, so those strange birds had naturally started to stir, seeking to vent out the rage held inside upon these remaining people. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The people who were fortunate enough to make it across could do nothing but watch on with horror. Their faces turned pale as they witnessed the brutal carnage, feeling utterly helpless. They should have expected that would happen. The Mind-Free Peak was not a place that any ordinary person could come to. Somebody would have to pay the price, even to the extent of giving up their lives, to end up becoming the stepping stone for others. Everything that happened here was being observed by someone. The woman who had been lounging lazily in her chair had suddenly seen something, which caused her silver irises to flare slightly, as her body slowly straightened up in her seat. She got up slowly and took a couple of steps forward, watching the familiar figure that had appeared on the enormous screen before her, caught in an entranced daze, like her mind had drifted away to some long and far distant memory. Chapter 301. 3. A person impossible to forget. Is she imagining things? Has she missed that person too much? And that is why she could not resist wanting to take a second look after seeing someone who looked like him? But that face looked exactly the same as his. One that she thinks she would never be able to ever forget. She had been so engrossed that she did not even notice that someone had come into the grand hall. Following the woman's gaze to see, Lianshur was naturally able to see the figure that caused the woman to look a little downcast. His eyes seemed to darken for an instant, but quick reverted back to its calm. Sovereign, Yenpa came over to report that the condition of the person imprisoned in the flame-devouring ice demon isn't looking too optimistic. If we do not carry out your plan as soon as possible, that person might be rendered useless soon. Her thoughts suddenly interrupted by the man's voice. The woman's brows creased up, seemingly slightly displeased. But after realizing what he just said, her expression grew cold. Just use elixirs to let her hang on for a while longer. I will not allow anyone to hinder my plans in any way. Understood. Lianshur bowed his head and said. He then saw the woman's eyes turning back to look at the screen after she said that, and his lips moved slightly as if hesitant to speak. But the woman had not noticed his actions in the slightest. A corner of Lianshur's lips lifted up in a scornful sneer, but he did not say anything, and just walked out from there. On the other side, inside the flame-devouring ice demon, Ingu was secretly transferring a little bit of spirit power into Qing Lanfei's body, and when she retracted her hands, her face turned pale for a moment. Qing Lanfei let out a helpless sigh and then said, Is there a need for you to do this? Even if I were to recover to the same level of cultivation I had before, I still wouldn't be able to get out of the flame-devouring ice demon. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. I've told you that I will save you and bring you out from here. Ingu curved up the ends of her pale lips, and the usually cold and distant girl suddenly revealed a smile that looked exceptionally beautiful and captivating. I know that you are just consoling me. Qing Lanfei responded as she shook her head slowly. Looking at the girl, she then said softly, Ingo, you've already helped me a lot, and I am very grateful to you. But do not continue doing this as I do not want you to get implicated. Ingji's gaze sharpened slightly, and she remained silent for a good long while before she came to say to Qing Lanfei, There's no need for all this talk of implicating this or that. I am doing this of my own accord. Qing Lanfei knitted up her brows and was just about to say something when she heard Ingo open her mouth to speak. Senior, the Mind-Free Peak has manifested before the people, and many of them have already set foot onto the Mind-Free Peak's territory and are just waiting for them to make a choice between life and death. The expression on Qing Lanfei's face immediately looked startled. Chapter 301. 4. A person impossible to forget. A few days ago, I went to see little Qingyu. She is perfectly fine except that her freedom is curtailed. So tell me, Senior, are you really going to give up? Ingo asked as she looked straight at the woman, pausing succinctly at every word as she spoke. Is little you really well? Qing Lanfei held Ingji's hand tightly as she asked in disbelief. She is perfectly fine. Ingo lifted her head up to reply. I've also told her not to be afraid, as I will try to find a way to save her, as her mother is still waiting for her. Qing Lanfei's face seemed to show she was a little moved by that, and just a moment later, looking like she had just made a big decision, she nodded her head and said, All right, I promise you that I will make sure I recover quickly, so that I can go save little you together with you. Ingji's face then broke into a highly comforted smile. Actually, she had not seen the young lady before, and she did not even know where she was imprisoned. That information had been tightly capped up, and she had not been able to glean even the slightest sliver of news about it from her master. The only thing she heard from her master was that the young lady was brought back here by the Supreme Lord Lian Shi himself. That man, besides Sovereign herself, was the most highly skilled and powerful pugilist in the Mind-Free Peak, who held an extremely high position, a deep and unfathomable person who always had a smile on his face before everyone. However, it was that same exact smiley face of his that was most terrifying and deadly. Even her master had to cordially yield to that man to a certain degree. For someone that was as lowly and insignificant as her, it was feared that she did not even have the right to speak to that man. But she will not give up. She will definitely be able to find out where that young lady has been hidden. Ingji's grip on Qing Lanfei's hand tightened up more and more. Senior, you have always protected me back in the past. Now it is my turn to protect you instead. I hope you have not forgotten what you promised me before, that you will forever go on to live in bliss and happiness on my behalf as well. After crossing over the Iron Chain Bridge, one would then be considered to have really entered into the Mind-Free Peak. But for one to merely just set foot into the realm proper, it took them 3 whole days. When they first made it through, everyone seemed rather eager and were in good spirits. But when they came to remember that a good number of their people had died, their mood suddenly grew solemn and heavy, as if they had just realized the kind of danger that existed there. However, since they had already come so far, it was a little too late for them to go back. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The entire construct of the Mind-Free Peak was like a place that would exist only in their dreams. So beautiful it felt highly surreal, as if touching anything in the slightest with their hands would cause them to evaporate into nothing. But everything there truly existed. What met their eyes was a massively sized snow lion, crouched low and really to spring, its wide open jaws making for a terrifyingly ferocious sight. But it was forever frozen in place, its entire body sealed up in thick glacial ice, and it looked like it had been dead for a long time. But its magnificent posture had been perfectly preserved, without the slightest bit of damage on its body, looking highly lifelike. Besides the snow lion that was the most enormous in size, there were many other beasts of all kinds, beasts that walked the earth, and also birds that flew in the sky, all of them frozen in place midway through the very last action they took when they were still alive, trapped in that place till death claimed them. It was as if they met with a great calamity, and the spirit beasts were unable to dodge and run away in time, to end up being trapped within the danger that suddenly fell upon them, never to strike a more lifelike pose than that. Chapter 302. 1. Why do you seem to look so sad? That is just too unbelievable. Are they dead? A young man with a handsome countenance took a couple of steps closer, and then muttered in a soft voice. He arched his head back to peer inquisitively at the massive snow lion, before he stretched a hand out tentatively to go touch it, only to feel a rock-hard layer of ice under his fingers. The man was taken aback for a while, and then shook his head as he found it rather funny. Why does he have this strange feeling that these spirit beasts are still alive? His companions who had gone on ahead called out to him, and the man immediately went on to catch up to them, no longer paying the frozen spirit beasts any attention. However, after everyone had walked far away from there, it was not known whether it was an illusion, but the deep brown eyes that were as big as bronze Belle's snow on the snow lion, encased in ice, suddenly seemed to blink once, and there was no more movement after that. Qing Yi Li and his gang were walking right at the back. There were several among them who were not human, and their senses were more sensitive than the humans. That was especially the case for Qing Yi Li. From the moment he had set foot into this place, his nerves had been tense and highly on edge. For just a very brief instant just now, he seemed to have faintly felt a strange aura, which made him feel rather uneasy. His brows slowly furrowed together, and his voice came out in a low tone. Everyone be on your guard. The first obstacle had already been so difficult, and moreover they were now within the Mine-Free Peaks territory, so they would have to be even more careful and wary. They must not let down their guard, not in the slightest. Can you remember the route you took when you came out? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU carrying the tiny furry ball in his arms, Lu Junyao lowered his head to look down and ask in a soft voice. Logically speaking, spirit beasts would usually be stronger than humans with some of their abilities. For example, they possess a highly precise and accurate sense of direction that would put most humans to shame, or the ability to track down things that they seek through the use of scent and aura. However, Meatball just shook its head with an innocent expression on its face at that place. I can only remember that the place that Mother is at was within a stretch of woods with very tall trees, and the ground was very low, which concealed the place very well, making it very hard to be discovered. Woods? When Qing Bei standing at the side heard that, his brows immediately knitted up. He then asked in a quizzical voice, "Are you sure you're not mistaken? The landscape around us is all ice, stretching as far as the eye can see in all directions, and the temperature is so bitterly cold there isn't a sliver of color anywhere. How could trees possibly grow in such severe and harsh weather conditions? I remember it very clearly. The woods were just outside the place. The trees were completely white like snow, both its leaves and trunk, which would blend in perfectly with the landscape we see here." Chapter 302. 2. Why do you seem to look so sad? Meatball tried very hard to remember, and then suddenly recalled something. It stretched its paw out and opened up its pink fleshy paw to reveal something white held within. Lu Junyao's gaze glinted sharply, and his long fingers slowly went to pick that thing up by its corner. Several of the others could not help but turn their eyes over to look, and they saw that it was a thin and pointed leaf, with a sharp jagged edge at its tip. The leaf felt cold in his hand, like it was actually a thin layer of ice. Lu Junyao then rubbed the leaf between his fingertips, and discovered that his fingers became wet, like the leaf had been covered in real ice that melts when exposed to heat. But the strange thing was that the leaf merely released a small amount of water, and did not look like it had melted in the slightest. "Are you able to find out anything with this?" Lu Junyao opened his mouth to ask as he handed the leaf over to the little beast. "It looks very familiar. I'm sure I have seen this before." Little Monster studied it carefully, and then went on to say slowly, the expression on his face looking a little helpless. "But I am unable to recall right now." Lu Junyao nodded slightly. "It's all right. We will find that place in the end. Take your time to think." They were furthest ahead, and had managed to leave all the other people far, far behind them. Hence they were temporarily not in any imminent danger. But right at that moment, something behind them seemed to be silently stirring. "Little one, you've been a little more well-behaved in the past 2 days." The man's voice held a sliver of mirth as it rang out slowly, and Qingyu in the pool who had her eyes closed while resting then opened when she heard those words. She looked at him expressionlessly and said, "What a free and idle life you lead, to be able to come visit me every day. It is only natural that I show the little pet I brought back personally a little more concern." Lian Shi's expression was tender, seemingly not affected in the least by the young lady's cold and icy demeanor. "I have really troubled you then." A corner of Qingyu's mouth turned up, her voice tinged with a hint of sarcasm, as she turned her head away from the man, like she was not keen in seeing the man at all. "You don't have to feel bad," Lian Shi said, as he took a couple of steps forward. "I came here today to let you see something. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." When his voice fell, his long fingers started to wave slightly in the air for a moment, and a large crystalline screen came to appear before Qingyu. "Arg, they are all alive. They are still alive. Quick, run." Qingyu had her head turned away, and did not notice what the man was doing at all, but she was attracted by the sound of voices that suddenly rang out. Her face immediately froze in shock when she turned her head around to look. Chapter 302. 3. Why do you seem to look so sad? On the screen that hung suspended in midair was a scene of chaos. Countless spirit beasts broke out from ice, their eyes filled with fiery bloodlust as they pounced upon the crowd of people maniacally. The scene she saw was nothing compared to the massive stampede that she had encountered before in the past. She had never seen so many spirit beasts moving together at the same time before, like they were being controlled by an evil entity. However, that was not what caught her attention the most. It was because among all those people, she had caught sight of several familiar faces, and Qingbei was among them. In that instant, Qingyu seemed to be unable to remain calm, her face grave as she stared at the people she saw before her eyes. She then said slowly through tightly clenched teeth, "What are you trying to do?" "I did not do anything at all," Lian Shi said with an upraised eyebrow, the expression on his face one of innocence. "These spirit beasts have been sealed in the Mine-Free Peak's icy plains for more than 1,000 years. Who would have thought that their life force would be so resilient, that actually kept them alive even though so many years have passed?" He looked at the young lady's face that was seemingly tense with suppressed rage, and then laughed out softly and said, "Those spirits beasts had their freedom that they loved the most taken away. So you can imagine the accumulated rage and indignance that had built up over 1,000 years. Sigh, those people are really so unlucky." Qingyu's fists clenched up tightly, her gaze fixed unwaveringly upon the people on the screen, who were being pursued by those spirit beasts, tearing and rending, fear making them forget that they were all cultivators, with some of them even forgetting to summon up their spirit powers at all, and just ended up being brutally slaughtered by the maniacal spirit beasts. What do you think? Isn't it interesting to see all those terrorized people running heedlessly in a frantic panic trying to escape? Coincidentally, that will also serve as a test for all of them, as only when one is faced with real danger, where they are placed in a life and death situation, would you be able to truly see their real capabilities. Qingyu did not say a single word as she watched the scene unfold on the screen, her lips tightly pressed together, looking a little pale and colorless. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Lian Shi had probably noticed that unusual look on her face, and he opened his mouth to ask, "What? There is someone you know among them?" Silent for another heartbeat, Qingyu finally peeled her eyes off the scene, turning to gaze indifferently at the man. "You came here just to show me this? I have seen it now, so you can now leave." Lian Shi froze for a moment, seemingly surprised by her calm demeanor. "You're not feeling the slightest bit of fear." "What is there to fear? With the Mind-Free Peak's manifestation, the people who manage to survive till the end will get recognized. At that time, you will be used to implement our plan to create the strongest weapon, turned into a mindless puppet to be manipulated," Lian Shi said, the look in his eyes seeming rather conflicted. Chapter 302. 4. Why do you seem to look so sad? That day will not come, and none of what you said will happen. Qingyu's eyes were narrowed as she said in a soft voice. Her tone was however strangely resolute. Lianshir could not help but shake his head. I really do not know where your confidence is coming from at all. Do you not realize the situation you're in now? You know something? From the moment I first saw you, I felt that you're a person who feels highly conflicted and is rather contradictory. Xingyu said unexpectedly, all of a sudden out of the blue. What do you mean? Xingyu did not respond to his question but went on to say, deep down inside, you do not want me to become what you said earlier, do you? She then turned to look back at the screen, upon the horrifying scene that was hard to look at. You do not want them to die as well. Lianshir's face that always carried a gentle smile seemed to congeal for an instant, before his lips curved up. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? Looks like I have treated you too well all this time and you've started to think that I'm a good person? Speaking of that, he then scoffed, like he was laughing at her overconfidence. If you think saying nice things to me and pretending to be good and obedient in front of me will make me consider letting you off and plead on your behalf, then you're really overthinking it too much. Although I am someone who appreciates and would treat a beauty gently, and you are indeed a lass who possess outstanding looks, it is very unfortunate that you are a unique existence who holds the power of the flame element. It doesn't matter even if you do not want to admit it. After all, who wouldn't possess a side of themselves that no one knows about? Xingyu raised her hands up before her, stretching them out to block out the rest of the man's face, leaving only his pair of eyes in sight. A strange phenomenon then happened. Lianshir had always been highly smiley before people, and his smile was one that was gentle and comfortable to see. But after blocking out the rest of his face, and leaving only his eyes visible, a pair of extremely good-looking eyes, long almond-shaped, not showing the slightest bit of devilish allure, but instead seemed clean and untainted, detached from worldly affairs. However, within that same pair of eyes was a kind of thick, undispellable sadness, which was highly disparate and out of place with his smile, in seemingly direct conflict. But his face was clearly still smiling. Why do your eyes carry some sort of compassion and pity for people? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU as an evil villain who has committed all sorts of bad deeds, but carries such a contradictory side in him. What is he feeling sad about? Is it because of all those lives that were lost, or is it because all of this was not what he wished for? The arc on Lianshir's lips grew deeper, and his voice sounded softly as she looked at him intently. Are you trying to read into my heart? Without waiting for Xingyu to reply, he just went on ahead and continued to say, compassion for people? Ha! I am not some kind of a saint seeking to deliver all living creatures from suffering. I am merely pitying myself. Chapter 303. 3. Lianshir's Origins 1. Although the world he lived in was very ordinary, he still believed that the incredible things told in legends truly existed. He was already perceived to be an inauspicious baby at birth. His mother carried him for 10 whole months throughout her pregnancy, and after painstakingly giving birth to him, a bunch of burglars immediately broke into their home to rob them. His father had merely tried to say a few words to explain their situation, when he was suddenly killed on the spot. His mother was inextricably weak after giving birth to him, finding it hard to even get out of bed. But it was probably because of a kind of innate strength a mother would come to find in themselves, for the sake of their child, no matter how weak and tiny they were. They would then turn strong. His mother placed him in a wooden bucket, leaving 2 small gaps open as she put the cover on, and hid him within a large water urn. It was not known how long a time passed as he remained within that seemingly endless darkness, before he finally came to see light again. A wise-looking old man had saved him, and the first words he said to the baby were, "Such a handsome-looking child but made to face such a hard life, not even able to even see your parents a single time, and they're already no longer around." It was only later that he found out that his parents had died the day he was born, and he had stayed in that water urn for the entire period of 7 days and 7 nights. He did not know who he managed to live through that. A freshly newborn, such a frail and fragile little life who did not eat or drink anything, while hidden within a small confined space. It was impossible that he was still able to remain alive. Some people might find it unbelievable, But he already possessed a sense of awareness when he was born, and could remember everything that happened. He grew up safely under the old man's care, and in the year that he turned 12, the old man passed on due to sickness, and he became all alone again. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He really hated that kind of a feeling, having people he was close to leave his side one by one, but was powerless to do anything about it. He grew indignant. After that, through a letter the old man left him, he found out that his worldly view was really too small and narrow. The world was not merely what his eyes had seen. There were still many amazing things waiting for him to go explore and discover. He began to search for the secrets towards achieving immortality. If another person that was highly important to him were to appear in his life once more, he would definitely not allow himself to just watch them leave him again, not wanting to feel that weak and utterly helpless anymore. He did not know how many places he has been to, or the number of different scenery his eyes have seen. He slowly came to grow stronger than before, but had not managed to find someone that could make him feel no longer alone. It was on a day that he can't remember, when a person suddenly came into his world. That girl was as dazzling and pristine as fresh icy snow. He had never met anyone like that, who was like an angel who had accidentally stumbled into the mortal realm. Chapter 303. 4. Liansher's Origins. 1. Every single frown and every slight smile of hers seemed to make him highly nervous. The girl would always laugh and tease that he was a foolish kid who had not seen the world. But even though that was the case, he was still happy deep inside his heart. The desolate feeling of being all alone seemed to be gradually leaving him. They partnered up to travel together after that, and they spoke a lot to each other along the way, so it was only natural that they became familiar with each other. He came to know from the girl's mouth that she came out to forge out a path for herself on her own, seeking to train herself up a little, and he also shared with the girl his thoughts. And just as he had expected, the girl laughed at him, saying that he had read too many of those nonsensical books, which resulted in him having all these superfluous and impractical ideas. Of course he did not mind it in the slightest, because as long as he had this person accompanying him by his side, no matter what she said to him, it would not matter. He then thought that he might have fallen in love with the girl, although he did not know how to win the girl's heart. But maybe it was because he was sincere and earnest that the girl seemed to have a sort of soft spot for him. But exactly how she felt towards him, nobody knew. In the end, as the two of them traveled, a third person suddenly appeared. A man who was far more outstanding than him regardless of looks or in cultivation. And the very first time he appeared, the girl's eyes had already been inextricably drawn to him. But that man was very quiet and not prone to words, basically never ever carrying a conversation with either of them. But Liansher discovered that the usually passive girl would actually take the initiative to go speak to the man. Even though the other party always showed her a cold, expressionless face, she seemed to continue to enjoy doing that. He then thought that all girls must like men like that. Handsome-looking, deep and powerful cultivation. Even if their personality was a little cold and aloof, it would not stop them from liking the man. Or they might even find him mysterious, which would attract their attention even more. But he had not really liked that man right from the beginning, not just because the girl was trying to get closer to him, but because the man possessed a pair of highly strange and unique violet eyes. The pair of eyes that did not look like what a normal human would possess seemed to be filled with a devilish aura, which he just came to unconsciously dislike. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. They were together for about a month's time when the man seemed to get used to it, gradually becoming less cold, and would occasionally say a few words to them. That change in the man delighted the girl to no end, and she loved to stick to the man even more from then on. Seeing that happen, Liansher's heart became depressed and tormented, but as he was in no position to make a stand, he could only try to avoid the two people, and his personality grew to become quiet and silent. One night, he found himself unable to sleep, and decided to go out of his room to take a walk. When he came back, he saw the man outside his room. Liansher did not say a single word to him, and was going to just go in to get some sleep. The man suddenly shifted his body and stood in his path. Just as Lian Shi's brows knitted up, and he was about to say something, the man's voice sounded out expressionlessly. I do not have feelings for her. Chapter 304. 1. Lian Shi's origins. 2. After the man said that, it immediately caused Lian Shi's body to freeze in his spot, his face filling up with rage. What did you just say? The girl that he had loved and treasured so much was going out of her way to put on a smile towards the man so affectionately, and he could not do anything but to suffer through it in mute silence. And now, the man who in his eyes was always pretending to be deep and unfathomable, was acting like he had nothing to do with any of it, and came here to tell him in such a curt and unfeeling tone that he had no feelings for the girl. Is there a man that can be more detestable than him in the world? However, not a single tinge of remorse could be seen on the man's face as he looked at Lian Shi and said, I do not have feelings for her, so you do not have to be so wary against me, nor harbor any kind of enmity towards me. I will never be with her, nor will I ever accept her. What do you mean by that? Faced with Lian Shi's fury, the man still seemed highly calm. He remained silent for a good while before his violet eyes then seemed to ripple with a strange vortex within, absorbing and captivating to see. Finally, before Lian Shi's stunned and flabbergasted face, the man then said slowly, because I am of the demon race and she is a goddess. In that instant, something seemed to dawn upon him. For the past 1,000,000 years, the demons and gods had fought and schemed against each other in order to win the right to rule over the world. Countless lives have been lost, and it seemed like they would never be able to peacefully coexist. Although he had once been suspicious about the man's identity, but hearing it right from the horse's mouth still gave him quite a shock. The man's words that followed, however, caused his irises to flare, and his hands to clench up tightly into fists, his entire shaking slightly from astoundment. Do you know who she is? She is one of the future inheritors of the throne among the gods, the person who would rule over all that is light. The reason she came out this time is merely to gain some merit, a chip to be used in her fight to ascend to the throne in future. Do you really think that she is as simple as the way you see her on the surface? Even you is merely just a pawn to be used in her chess game to her. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You are lying. He did not know what kind of feelings were coursing through him at that moment, but subconsciously, he just did not want to believe in that harsh and cruel truth. And seeing that look of self-denial on Lian Shi's face, the man merely curved up his lips and went on to say, you are just a weak and powerless human, and should not be dragged into this. That person is also not someone you can afford to provoke. Why should I believe your words? Lian Shi then said in a cold tone. It does not matter even if you choose not to believe me. This is just a friendly warning to you, as I do not want to see you being so foolishly used, and treats me like an imaginary rival in love every day. After the man said that in a highly indifferent voice, he immediately turned around and left. Chapter 304. 2. Lian Shi's origins. 2. That night he stood there outside his room throughout, till the sky over the horizon slowly lightened, before he then dragged his stiff and numb body back into his room. From that night after he laid his cards out before Lian Shi, the man suddenly bade farewell to the group just a few days later, saying that he had urgent matters to attend to and needed to return home. When they parted, the girl was highly reluctant for the man to leave, persistently asking if they would be able to meet again, to which the man merely cast a meaningful glance towards Lian Shi, who was standing just a short distance away, and then said in a soft voice, I believe that we will come to meet each other again. It was only later that he found out that the man had left so suddenly, because the struggle between the gods and demon race, that had gone on for millions of years, had finally broken out into a war, and the battles were becoming highly intense. Throughout their journey on the road, dead corpses of both the god and demon races could be seen almost everywhere, the once beautiful landscape destroyed and ruined. Even the human were affected by it, as disasters and calamities were incessant due to the battles between the god and demon races. Wreckage and destruction everywhere to be seen, a cold and desolate scene. It was only sometime at a much later period that the girl came to tell him one day about her real identity. It was exactly as what the man had told him back then. She told him that her objective in coming out on this journey was to find the seed of the demon race and to try to win his trust before gouging out his demonic heart. In that way, the demon race would be defeated without having to fight them, because the demon seed held unparalleled power within the entire demon race and was a great pillar of strength and faith for their people. If he was destroyed, then the demon race would no longer pose to be much of a threat anymore. And if she were to achieve that, then she would then become the undisputed ruler over the gods, and no one would dare go against her. She had then asked him, "Are you willing to stay by my side and help me?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She had really said that to him in the end. Everything was exactly as what the man had told him before. He realized that it was no coincidence that she had come to appear by his side right from the beginning, and it might be because he had something on him that was of some worthy use to her. Perhaps he was really such a great fool. Even when he knew that she was merely making use of him, he was still unable to refuse her anything. The war between the god and demon races raged on for 3 whole months before it finally ceased. And in this war the gods lost, because the gods' heir apparent to the throne was captured by the demon race, and the gods were immediately disadvantaged. That was their future ruler, and they did not dare to take the risk. Chapter 304. 3. Liansher's Origins, 2. And the demon race did not take the opportunity to make any outrageous demands, but merely ordered for them to retreat, and for them to never set foot onto any of the demon race's territories. If they were to see anyone of the demon race in future, they must keep their distance from them, and not cause them any affront. Otherwise, they would send the head of their heir apparent back to them. Just as everyone on the god's side were holding down the tight ball of indignance they felt in their chest, and were about to accede to the demands, they suddenly received news from above. And the news had not only shocked everyone from the god's side, even the people from the demon race could not believe it. The original words in the message was that all of them need not concern themselves with the situation, as there was more than one heir to the throne of the gods. So it did not matter if this heir was killed, but the face of the race of gods cannot be allowed to be trampled upon or humiliated by anyone. Such a callous and unfeeling course of action was usually something that only people from the evil demonic race would do. Never did anyone think that people from the highly revered god's race could also be so heartless, to only care about their face, and were willing to abandon the heir to the throne they had spent so much effort to groom. As the saying goes, a tiger does not eat its own cubs. But this ruler of the gods, his heart, must be harder and colder than stone. Did you hear that? You have been abandoned. How cold-hearted. None of them had ever thought that the situation would turn out like this when they see this man again. The man peered down at them from his raised throne upon the pedestal, his pair devilishly deep and captivating violet eyes, not carrying a single sliver of emotion, like he was looking at 2 people who were complete strangers to him, and they had never met each other before. The man had said he was from the demon race, but never had they thought that he was the mysterious and powerful demon seed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The expression on the woman's face remained calm throughout, as she looked at the man seated high above. In her silver irises, a sliver of mirth seemed to rise. "We still came to meet in the end. Didn't you already know who I am right from the beginning?" A corner of the man's mouth lifted. "Since that is the case, you do not need to continue to put on an act in front of me anymore, do you?" "Put on an act?" The smiles in the woman's eyes seemed to dim slightly. "In your eyes, you really think the way we interacted with each other for that whole entire month was all just a phony act? Huh?" The man's tall figure suddenly stood slowly up from his seat, before he came walking over towards the woman a step at a time, and then slowly bent his body slightly to look at the woman out of the corner of his eyes as he said, "Are you trying to tell me that you have really fallen for me?" Chapter 304. 4. Liansher's Origins, 2. Would you then believe me? The woman's face slowly came to break into a smile, a misty sheen seeming to shimmer within her eyes. "Why? Why do you have to be the demon seed? Then why did you have to be the heir to the throne of the gods? The man seemed to be tickled by her words, and his long fair-skinned fingers gently lifted the woman's chin, as his handsome face leaned in closer. His voice was close to bewitching as he said slowly, "Since you love me, why not? You give up your race as a god for my sake? And when the day that we are wed, I will definitely invite your father to attend, in order to show my sincerity. The races of gods and demons will then be bonded more strongly. What do you think? Isn't that a really great idea? Do you sincerely want to marry me, or are you just trying to make use of me to achieve your objective of humiliating the gods?" The expression on the woman's face that was forced to look up at him seemed to carry a tinge of pain and sadness. That expression of hers did not elicit the slightest bit of sympathy from the man, but made him push her away with a look of disgust on his face. "Why would you need to put on such a pitiful face for? Making it look like I am dumping you after having toyed with your feelings? Ha! With a woman with such a devious and scheming mind like you, I will never believe a single word that comes out from that mouth of yours." Throughout the entire process, he was like an uninvolved outsider, watching the love and hatred evolve and erupt between them. He saw the instant the light that shone from deep within the woman's eyes in the beginning, which slowly dimmed and turned gray, till there was not a single bit of light in them. Maybe the man was wrong in one thing. Though she had indeed wanted to get close to the man and him with impure intentions in the beginning, something that not even he himself could have ever expected then happened in the end. And that was, she has really fallen for the man, fallen in love with the enemy that the gods wanted to kill and be rid of the most. What the man did not know was, the reason she had come to be captured by the demon race, and was even abandoned by the gods, was all because of him. It was because she came to find out the man's identity in the end, and after an intense struggle within herself, she still chose him. She had even attempted to persuade her father, the highest and undisputed ruler of the people of the gods' race, to call a cease to the warring and let peace and tranquility return back to the lands. She was the most obedient, the sweetest and most loving one all this time, and was highly favored. Her abnormal and unusual conduct this time had caused her father to smell that something was amiss in all this almost immediately. In the end, she had told her father truthfully that she had fallen in love with someone from the demon race. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Her father had of course flown into an unbridled rage, admonishing her that she must completely give up on that idea, or she would not only lose her place as the heir, but be spurned and suffer the abuse from the entire race of the gods. At that moment, she defied her father for the very first time, and just as she expected, she was chased out by her father. As she was feeling down and dispirited, her mind in a fluster, she ended up being ambushed by the demons and captured. And when she saw him again after going through so much, she was being treated by him like this. With ridicule, suspicion, disgust. Haha. She's such a great big joke. Chapter 305. 1. Liansher's Origins 3. That's right, from the very beginning, it had been a one-sided affair of her own making the entire time. He had never expressed any feelings for her before, isn't it? Maybe he might have come to love her, but their identities had destined that they could only be opposing enemies. She had wanted to help him, but even after she sacrificed herself, not only was she still not able to be of any help, she had made him detest her even more. But what she found the hardest to believe was still her father. She had thought that her father's words that day had only been said in a fit of anger, and she was still the child her father loved the most, and would not be so hard-hearted towards her. In reality, she had just overestimated herself, and underestimated her father's cold-hearted callousness. She thought that being the chosen heir to the throne was merely a ceremonial front put up just to show the people outside. After all, among the numerous children that father has, not a single one could stand shoulder to shoulder against her, regardless whether it was in terms of cultivation, stratagems, or wit. How could he possibly give up on such an outstanding candidate as his heir, and go on to choose to groom all those useless bums? But she had been too naive, though her father did favor her greatly, and had recognized her as the future heir to the throne. but the dignity and prestige of their race would forever be more important than anything else in his heart. That was because he was not only just a father, but also the ruler of the entire god's race. If their race came to be humiliated by the demons because of her this time, they would be seen to be inferior to the demons thereafter. Even if people did not explicitly say anything, they would secretly blame him for not looking after the greater picture, and had shamed the entire race of the gods. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Hence, no matter how reluctant and painful it was to him, he could not possibly bow his head and show weakness before the demon race. It would be a lie to say that she was not disappointed by her father's decision, but she would never hold it against him, as she really understood that her father was given no other choice. Having thought it through in her heart, she was able to see things from another perspective, and it did not bother her that much anymore. In the vast and expansive palace of the demon race, the place felt sinister and empty. The demon disciple who had brought the woman in here had long retreated from there a long while ago, and there were only 3 people in that place at that moment, just like it was when they first met. With devilishly bewitching violet eyes, the man with an outstandingly good-looking countenance was cold and aloof like he was back then, standing with his hands behind his back without saying a single word, a thick impenetrable gloominess roiling deep within his eyes. None among the 3 of them opened their mouth to say anything, and the air was thick and heavy, deadly silent. Chapter 305. 2. Lianshire's Origins 3. Time trickled by bit, and it was not known how long a period passed before the woman's soft voice that sounded like it carried a slight hoarse tinge suddenly echoed in that vast hall, her words causing the shade on the faces of the 2 men in there to change. "Just have me killed." The woman's voice was calm and level, without a single ripple in its intonation, like she was speaking of something that could not be any more ordinary. "What did you say?" The man's violet eyes peered sinisterly at her, seeming to carry an indecipherable emotion, an emotion too deep and complex to be perceived. "Just kill me." The woman looked right at the man, and came to repeat the words she said earlier, her beautiful silver eyes wet with a heart-rending mist. Her pale white lips were curled up in a cold hard smile. Killing their chosen heir right before the people of the gods' race would definitely still deal a devastating blow to their morale, even though I have been abandoned by them. "You want me to make use of you to defeat the gods?" The man's eyes narrowed, as if he was determining the veracity of her words. "The gods have already abandoned me anyway, and you do not trust me, isn't that right? In that case, is there a need to spare me my life? I am now just a pawn who is no longer of any use, so at least let me do something for you just before I die." The color on the man's face grew even darker. "You think I will believe your words?" Against this face of cold, taunting sarcasm of his, the woman seemed to have become accustomed to it. She merely smiled faintly in response and said, "A dying person's words come right from the heart. I admit that I did hide my identity in the beginning, but—" Her voice paused for a moment at that point, her gaze locked straight onto the man's deep violet eyes. "I love you. This much is true." "Love me?" The smile on the man's face grew ironic. "A person from the gods' race has fallen in love with one from the side of their most hated enemy? Even if you were really unaware of my identity as one of the demon race, for you to come to fall for a demon, is it because you have merely grown bored, and was just tired of staying there among the gods? So you thought to come to experience living with the demon race for a bit?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The woman's face grew even more pale. Her lips moved, looking like she wanted to say something, but was then heartlessly interrupted by the man. "You do not need to waste any more of your breath. Since you want to do something for me before you die, I shall grant you your wish." Immediately upon saying that, the man turned himself around and strode out of the palace hall. The thick and heavy door was pulled open, and it then boomed shut, the short chill gust of wind that blew in causing the air in the palace hall to turn sinister and cold. The woman stood there with her head raised up, looking at a tiny window above that let in a sliver of the moonlight. She did not move for a good while, and it was not known what was going through her mind at that moment. The back of her thin and frail-looking body, looking so desolate and pitiful. He lowered his eyes and remained silent for a long while, hesitant to speak. In the end, he asked slowly in a soft voice, "Why did you not tell him?" Chapter 305. 3. Lian Shi's Origins 3. Upon hearing his voice, the woman's body jumped slightly. "Tell him what?" "Tell him about all the things that you gave up because of him, and that he cannot treat you like that." Her hands hanging at her sides unconsciously clenched up. "What does it matter if I tell him?" The woman laughed softly. Her voice seemingly turned a little hoarse from despair. "Didn't you see it yourself just now? You will not believe a single word I say. It is probably fated that the people from the races of gods and demons would never come to bear fruition." The next day, things turned out just as the man said. He got the demon race's disciples to seize the woman and brought her out to be displayed before everyone. People from the gods' race watched their every move. Those actions had of course not escaped their attention, but word had already come down from above that they had already given up on this heir. So what were the guys from the demon race up to now? Are they still trying to use that useless pawn to threaten them? I heard that the gods' race are prepared to give up on this heir of theirs, and do not care whether this woman lives or dies. The man's violet eyes were filled with an indecipherable sort of mirth, as he walked slowly over to the woman, and grabbed her chin in his hand, forcibly raising her head up. Although the pale and highly haggard countenance looked rather worn out, there was still a hidden stubborn strength within her eyes. Seeing that, the amusement on the man's face became more intense. "What a pitiful thing you are. You've done everything you can to do so much for the gods' race, but in the end, they have mercilessly abandoned you so quickly. Do you want to exact revenge on them?" Without waiting for the woman to respond, the man turned to the people from the gods' race and said, "Because of your so-called face and dignity, you were willing to give up on such an outstanding heir. I must say that the cold-bloodedness of the gods' race has really opened my eyes to see you in a new light, whom I will say have even surpassed us, the demon race itself that pales in comparison." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. "You, enough of your useless jabbering. Just what do you want?" Someone from the gods' race grew impatient and opened his mouth to ask. The man gave a lazy smile and responded, "It's nothing really, but because this heir of yours here would rather die than to join the demon race here. A rather loyal member of the gods' race, I must say. So in order to fulfill her wish, I decided to allow her an appropriate death, so that all of you from the gods' race will hold her in grateful remembrance, and keep her forever deep in your hearts." After he finished saying those words, the people from the gods' race were in an uproar. The woman whose face had been calm and at peace suddenly appeared startled as she stared blankly at the man standing before her, looking like she was feeling a little bewildered by the man's words. It was a little different from what he had said before. He had clearly said such cold and heartless words that day, which chilled her heart completely. But in the end, why was he defending her before the people from the gods' race, trying to fill the hearts of those people with guilt, by making them think that she was sacrificing herself for the sake of the entire gods' race? Chapter 305. 4. Lian Shi's Origins 3. But only she herself knew the best what she held in her own heart. Isn't he absolutely disgusted with her? Why then? Why not we execute her with death by 1,000 cuts? Using an unbelievably sharp blade to slice the flesh of a person piece by piece should be absolutely fascinating. The man's handsome countenance looked so harmless, as his mouth spouted those brutal and cruel blood-filled words. Death by 1,000 cuts. Do you know how painful it would be? Every single slice onto the flesh would make you wish you would die in that instant, but can only feel that insufferable and excruciating pain that is so much worse than dying. The sweet release of death coming to you only when the last drop of blood drips out from your body. It is said that only the most exceptional among executors will be able to carry out such a high-level form of execution, causing his victim to suffer the most intolerable pain and not die from the torment. Coincidentally, we happen to have people of such capabilities here within the demon race. So why don't we let everyone here have a chance to widen our horizons today? How about that, everyone? Just hearing the man describe it was enough for people to imagine just how unimaginably cruel it was, not to mention that it would be inflicted onto a live person. She was such a weak and petite-sized woman. How could she possibly endure that kind of a torment? You must be the devil himself. Do you think that you will be able to strike at the god's race like this? That will just be pure wishful thinking. When one heir dies, the god's race can very well just groom a second one. All it takes will just be a little more time. Do not think for a moment that by doing this, the god's race will be humiliated by this. Rest assured, princess, we will definitely make them pay for all the aggrievement you've suffered so you can go in peace, as the god's race will forever remember you. She could no longer hear all the voices filling up her ears, as she had already grown numb to all of it. Do you see? It's just laughable that not a single one among them is sincerely seeking to save you. People of the god's race are able to proclaim themselves as gods only because they are better at pretending than the demon race, and are able to hide the filthy rotting hearts under the saintly and holy flesh shells they cloak themselves with so well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The man said softly to the woman beside her. She really did not know why he would say those words to her. Didn't he say he would kill her? Why has he still not made any move? And just as her mind was caught in a chaotic turmoil of thoughts, she suddenly sensed a terrifying power that was filled with unbridled bloodlust and resolute and unswerving murder lunging straight towards her, so ferociously quick that she did not even have time to dodge away at all. And her body just stood there still and unmoving, frozen stiff in place without giving off the slightest bit of temperature, because the power she sensed was one that felt so highly familiar. Chapter 306. 1. From now onwards, you are him. It was her father. Having faced each other so closely for such a long period of time, she had grown to become highly familiar with her father's powers. And this menacingly powerful force lunging straight towards her was seeking to take her life, without the slightest hesitation. Probably, right from the very beginning, her father had groomed her and shown her so much favor only because she was the most outstanding one among all his daughters, and would become the most useful one to him. Blood ties and kinship. Sigh. What is that? That meant the absolute least to the god's race. Before self-interest, anything and everything can be sacrificed. And she had still been anticipating. She did not dodge, neither did she want to dodge. Just let it all end. The corners of her lips curved up into a faint smile, and she closed her eyes as if she was waiting for the sweet release of death. In that instant, two voices suddenly sounded in her ears. One filled with panic and terror, carrying pain and disbelief in its tone, while the other voice was still as cold and heartless as before. But for some unknown reason, she could somehow detect a faint sliver of concern in the second voice. A lethal and powerful finishing strike from the highest and most supreme entity in the god's race. Even if one was fortunate enough to survive, they would not be able to live for very much longer. Moreover, it was a strike that had come like a bolt out of the blue, which caught everyone completely off guard. The expected pain and agony did not come, but the tumultuous noises she had heard in her ears suddenly fell deathly silent, and the air grew so heavy and oppressive it was getting rather hard to breathe. What has happened? She slowly opened her eyes, and she saw that there seemed to be a shadowy figure filling her sight, and it was impossible for her to see clearly for an instant. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She struggled to force her eyes wide open in order to see, and discovered the very person who had always remained by her side all this time, despite the fact that he knew that she was merely making use of him, shielding her as he stood right in front of her, his thin and lean figure seeming exceptionally tall and towering right at that moment. That handsome countenance of his was smiling at her like always, but there was some sort of a warm liquid, droplets that dripped onto her face. One of the droplets fell right at the corner of her eye, and she lifted a hand to wipe it away, coming to discover that her fingers were stained bright red. The look on her face was blank as she lifted her head up in a daze, as she saw a large gaping hole in the man's chest, precise and exact, right where his heart had been. Her lips quivered in utter helplessness, and something seemed to well up from inside her eyes, blurring her vision. He's merely just an ordinary human, but he had used his own body of flesh and blood to shield her, even though it would not have any effect. Chapter 306. 2. From now onwards, you are him no effect at. Wait. That weak and frail body of a human. How could it possibly block such a powerful and lethal strike? She wiped her eyes clear, and when she looked again, she seemed to notice something else. Behind the man, there was another person standing there, similarly putting up a defensive stance where he stood, where she was only able to see the wide and resolute back of the person. She could not see the expression on the person's face, and was unable to tell if he was hurt. But how could he possibly not be hurt in this situation? With the two people shielding her, she did not even suffer a single scratch. The man standing in between had his heart shot right through behind the first person shielding them, taking in all the damage from the remaining power of the blocked strike. The force completely dissipated by the time it reached her. That would mean that the person in front must have withstood a much larger portion of the damage alone, maybe even more than that. However, the man still stood in his spot with his back straight and unyielding, not moving a single inch. She was suddenly a little afraid, to the extent that her heart skipped a beat. Her voice came out incredibly hoarse, not caring if the man was going to show her the same expression of disdain at that moment. She called out his name. Lianshi, a name that people of the gods' race were most bothered by. To think that the leader of the demon race, whose cultivation was so powerful and unfathomable, would possess such a pleasing and melodious-sounding name, like one that would belong to a proud and revered celestial being from beyond the 9 heavens, or to a pious holy disciple that received Buddha's teachings of the Sanskrit right before Buddha himself. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But that name should not, in all circumstances, belong to an evil being from the vile demon race. The man with the well-built figure seemed to have heard someone call out to him as he slowly came to turn around. But the moment his body turned, it immediately caused crystalline tears to flow down the woman's face. There was the slightest shade of color on the man's handsome countenance. As people from the demon race were born to live in dark and sunless places, their complexion was fairer than others, but it wasn't the same frightful paleness she saw on the man at that moment. However, that was not what pained the woman's heart the most, but it was the pair of usually deeply mesmerizing violet eyes of his, which at that moment had turned red like blood. Upon looking more closely, she then saw that his eyes had not merely turned red, but were actually bleeding inside, together with a trickle of blood that could be seen flowing down from the corner of his mouth. The man just stood there, staring at her without saying a single word, watching the woman sob till she was unable to speak, her thin slender body shaking incessantly, so overcome with grief she just could not control herself, unable to stop. Chapter 306. 3. From now onwards you are him Lianshi. Are you alright? You're scaring me. Seeing her in that state, the man was silent for a moment, the expression on his face a little helpless. He then walked slowly over, stopping right in front of her, and lowering himself down in a crouch. What are you crying for? His voice did not sound strange or different, but carried a crisp melodious tenor, which just caused the woman's tears to flow down in torrents. She then said in between sobs, "Your eyes." "It's all right." The man clicked his tongue, and his gaze turned to look at the man who had a large gaping hole in his chest, who did not seem to be breathing anymore. His expression seemed to turn a little conflicted, as he said in an indifferent voice, "He really cared about you. What a great pity. I lost this time. To think that I lost to a human in speed. He is really more suited to be with you than I am." The man stretched out his hand, his actions looking like he was seeking to gently wipe away the tears on the woman's face. However, the woman's body tensed up, and her eyes flared wide in disbelief. So there are moments he can be so gentle? And that was when he was faced with her, a person he abhorred so much. Could it be? He doesn't really hate her that much deep in his heart. Otherwise, why would he say something like this now? "I can save him." The man uttered out those words all of a sudden, his eyes looking straight at her. "How are you going to save him?" The woman asked, her brows furrowing up in puzzled bewilderment. She did not manage to get a response from the man, because in the very next instant, she came to know what sort of method he was going to use to save the man. With a smile on his face, he curled his fingers up into claws and dug his hand right into his own chest. Immediately, a violet light burst forth from his chest, the scorching and blinding light stinging her eyes. Lianshi. Her voice was almost breaking from terror. Has he gone nuts? Does he know how important his demon heart is to him? Does he even know what he is doing at all? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Why would he go save a human who is totally unrelated to him? Even though the human had died because he wanted to save her. So what? That was a debt she owes. Why did he have to be the one to pay? Have you lost your mind? Stop that now. Stop it right now. She was frantically trying to go stop him, but all of that was already too late. The man had suddenly dug out his demonic heart, and then plunged his hand into the gaping hole in the human's chest to fill it up. In what seemed to be just a blink of an eye, the mortal wound in the human's chest had healed, and not a single mark could be seen on the flawless, unblemished skin. Chapter 306. 4. From now onwards, you are him. The man's head of inky black hair turned snowy white, the blood-red irises from before slowly assuming a faint violet shade, but not the slightest sliver of spiritedness could be detected from his body anymore. He looked at the woman's highly dazed look and smiled slightly. Do not overthink it too much. I am not that big-hearted or gracious, but it is merely because he can still be saved while I do not have any way of reversing this situation anymore. I was born into the demon race, but you probably did not know that my mother was actually once from the god's race. But because she came to fall in love with a person from the demon race, and was sentenced to the most cruel punishment, she was hated and scorned by each and everyone. Not a single person was willing to plead for her. All of them just could not wait to have her killed to be rid of her. In the end, I was not even able to save the tiniest bit of her primordial spirit essence. That is why I hate every single person from the god's race so much, as the blood that flows in their bodies are even more cold-blooded and venomous than any one of us in the demon race. They are the most hypocritical race throughout the entire world, and I made a pledge to myself that as long as I remain alive, the demon race and the god's race shall forever be at odds. I seek to kill every single person from the god's race down to their very last man, to make them suffer the very same intolerable and deadly pain. Speaking up to that point, his voice paused for a moment, seemingly a little contemptuous. His gaze then slowly turned towards her. But why must you turn out to be the lone exception? Within all that filth and scourge that the god's race is, you were so clean and pristine, like a flower that has yet to weather through any storms, the unspoiled purity still preserved in your heart. I've said before that we can never be together. That is not because I hate you, but inversely, it is because I love you. The woman's irises contracted greatly, unable to believe that she would actually hear such words coming out from the man's mouth. He had said that he loves her. Is she dreaming? You're so pristine and untainted, whereas I am unworthy. He said he was unworthy to have someone as good as her, and unworthy to have her fall so low, to lose all her dignity in loving him. The person who should already be dead came back to life. At that point, it seemed he was still an outsider, a mere passerby in their lives. Even the fact that his life had been extended was because it was stolen from someone else. That man disappeared after that. It was not known how much he said to the woman, before his body began to turn more and more fuzzy into a blur, to finally become a hazy image of a lotus bloom. The image appeared only for a highly brief instant, and dispersed into the wind in a fine powder, disappearing without leaving a single trace behind. So it turned out that he was not truly a demon. Half of the blood in his body was actually of the gods' races, and his mother was actually a lotus bloom that grew in the pond within the gods' race territories, who assumed human form after 1,000 years' cultivation. But her life had been so short and fleeting, and now, it was the same with her son, disappearing completely from the world. But he had not forgotten the silent words the man had said to him before he dissipated into the wind. Protect her well. Sigh. He had known it for a very long time, that it wasn't that the man did not love her, but he had actually loved her so oppressively, much too deeply, and he only dared to say it out aloud at the moment just before his death. And how was it any different for him? He had only been lying to himself all along. He looked at the woman who stood there frozen in place, not moving an inch. From the moment that the man disappeared, something in her had seemed different. He walked over to her and patted her gently on the shoulder. What came to meet his eyes were a pair of eyes that were icy cold, without the slightest bit of emotion in them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When she turned to look at him, her expression looked dazed and completely blank for a moment. In the woman's pair of crystalline clear silver eyes, he could see himself reflected in them, with very familiar-looking violet eyes. Lianshi, the woman's voice called out softly. What? He was stunned with surprise. From today onwards, you are Lianshi. Chapter 307. 1. A path to life or to death. At this point, the tale finally came to an end. Qingyu also finally understood why this man had always given her the feeling he was rather self-contradictory. There was clearly a kind of clean purity about the guy that made him seem to be untainted by the mortal world. But there were also times that his actions reflected a sinister and evil side of him. That was because in his body, another soul lay hidden, that enabled him to have his life extended, an existence that was highly crucial and important. She also finally understood why his eyes always carried an inextinguishable sadness inside. Or to put it more accurately, those eyes did not belong to him, but to another lonely and sad soul who was not willing to leave. That woman in the story, who is she? Qingyu then asked in a soft voice. Lianshi's eyes looked down slightly, and said in an emotionless voice, she is the only god that still lives from those millions of years ago till now, the Lord of the Mind-Free Peak. The expression on Qingyu's face was not all that surprised, as if she had already guessed it. From the story you told, I was already able to guess it, and the reason for all these things that the woman is doing now. She must have changed to become someone even you are no longer able to recognize, isn't it? All this time, you've just been that man's substitute. Right. Substitute. Lianshi laughed softly. Even though I know that to be the case, I could never bear to refuse her, willing to carry all the sin myself, and have blood on my hands rather than her. She used to have such a clean and pure soul, but she is now just a little too tired, and merely feels that the world is too cold a place right now. And the two people she had cared the most about, her father had abandoned her, while the man who loved her had died in order to protect her. There was probably nothing that could come to devastate her any more than that, right? Seeing how self-delusional the man was, Qingyu's brows knitted up, a little hesitant and feeling rather sympathetic, but she still went ahead to speak the truth, that the man was seemingly not entirely willing to accept. She seeks to resurrect that Lianshi, am I right? The man kept his eyes lowered, and they seemed to blink a few times weakly. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. But do you know that if that Lianshi comes back to life, you will then cease to exist? She will then not even remember you. Not remember that there was once someone who never ever left her side in her life. A person who loved her more than his own life. The ends of Lianshi's lips curled up slightly, seemingly a little self-mocking as he said, so what? If that is what she wants, I will do everything I can to help her. The past million years that I've lived was stolen anyway. Or it was just charity that was given to me by that man. After saying that, a warm and friendly smile slowly came to show on Lianshi's face, his gaze looking at Qingyu seemingly a lot more gentle. He then said, I do not know why, but all these things have laid buried deep in my heart for so many years, and I have never brought it up to anyone before. But I have somehow come to share it with you today. You are really quite an amazing little lass, you know. Chapter 307. 2. A path to life or to death. Qingyu was a little taken aback, before she laughed out helplessly. Can that really be considered to be praise? Even though that is the case, it is already destined that you will not be able to escape. Actually, the legend about the Mind-Free Peak came about from misconceptions being piled upon more misconceptions. All these years, what the Mind Free Peak seeks has never been highly skilled pugilists, but for a suitable catalyst to revive that man. And I am that catalyst. Originally, your mother was the most suitable candidate, but unfortunately, just as she was growing to be able to give off the greatest effect to it, the chastity of her body was broken by someone, and she lost all her value. The plan that had taken 1,000 years to prepare had to be temporarily shelved. Speaking up till that point, Lianshur could not help but look at her with a meaningful glance. Throughout all the realms, we were unable to find a single person who possessed the mutated flame element, and your mother was an extremely rare exception. Never have I ever thought that you would turn out to be even more well-suited to be the catalyst we sought, as the flame element in your body is so utterly pure and clean, completely unspoiled, the very best choice there is. Qingyu listened to those words in silence, and a long while passed before she looked up at him with incomprehension in her eyes. Why would you tell me all this? Lianshur paused for a moment before he laughed softly and said, It is probably because I find it such a great pity that from then onwards, the world would no longer have such an interesting soul like you in existence anymore. Interesting? Then I must really feel highly honored. Qingyu scoffed, as she broke out into a soft mocking laugh. Lianshur was not bothered by the scorn in her tone, but merely narrowed his eyes slightly smilingly. All right then. I should go take a look at all those people already. They would probably have reached the place they were meant to go to by now. Upon saying that, he turned himself around and was going to leave. Qingyu suddenly felt a twitch tug between her brows for no reason, and she quickly called out, Hey, wait! The only response to her was the slowly disappearing figure of the man. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qingyu sighed out helplessly. For some unknown reason, she suddenly had a bad feeling. She didn't even know whether that little meatball was able to find little Belle or not, as she had not seen any sign of the youth on the screen earlier. Flame-devouring ice demon. Because orders had come down from the top that nothing must happen to Qing Lanfei now, Yanpe relaxed his guard towards the woman a little, which allowed Ingge to come more frequently these few days, and was able to escape notice. Hearing the soft patter of light footsteps, Qing Lanfei turned her gaze over to look, seeming to have guessed who the person was. The expression on her face was not all that surprised when she sighed softly and said, Ingge, I've said that you do not need to come here anymore. Chapter 307. 3. A Path to Life or to Death. Senior. Those people have come, but unfortunately, many of them lost their lives. Ingge said in a low voice, her tone grave. Qing Lanfei was slightly taken aback. Who is here? There are many of them, including people whom you care about, Ingge said, as she waved her hand lightly through the air. An image immediately appeared before her, and a familiar figure slowly came to be revealed. But he seemed to be moving alone by himself, as there was no other person beside him. And the place he was at looked strange and unfamiliar to Qing Lanfei, who did not know what kind of a place it was, even though she had lived in the Mind Free Peak for a number of years in the past. Jingyu. Qing Lanfei's hands subconsciously clenched up, and a tinge of worry came to fill her eyes. Why has he come? And how did he manage to find this place? Why isn't he with little Belle and the others? Is he doing this without any of the others knowing anything about it? It's not just him, Ingge went on to say, and her hand waved through the air again. Qing Bei's face that had several streaks of blood on it then appeared on the screen, his expression nervous, like he was hiding from something, and his situation did not look highly optimistic. They are all searching for you, Ingge said with a serious face as she looked at Qing Lanfei. Senior, now that these people are here, the security at some places would inadvertently loosen slightly. This is the best time for you to leave here. Qing Lanfei looked startled. Leave? I told you that I will help you. Ing Ji's sweet and pretty face was resolute as she gripped Qing Lanfei's hands tightly, and she then saw the chains bound around her wrists start to melt bit by bit. In the span of a few breaths, the bindings have disappeared completely. Having been shackled under those heavy bonds for such a long period, Qing Lanfei found herself a little unused to the feeling of having her hands freed. But what surprised her even more was what Ge had just done. Have you lost your mind? If Master finds out. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. But before she could even finish, she saw Ge use the same method to dissolve the chains around her ankles. Let's go. Ge helped her up gently, letting the still weakened Qing Lanfei lean her full weight onto her. As they made their way towards the exit a step at a time, there was naturally someone keeping watch over the flame-devouring ice demon, and when they saw Ge bringing someone out, they quickly went up to stop her with a wary look on his face. With a calm, cool face, she said in an expressionless voice, Deity Yanpa gave his orders that this person must not die as yet, and is to be given elixirs to prolong her life. The flame-devouring ice demon is not a suitable place to nurse her, and I was sent here to bring her to the deity's residence. Chapter 307. 4. A path to life or to death. The person guarding the place saw how composed she was, and there was no sign of her being flustered in any way. Turning to look at the highly weakened woman, who looked like she was on the verge of death, and seeing the fact that Ge was deity Yanpo's direct disciple, he thought the whole thing sounded rather plausible. Giving it a thought for another moment, the guard then nodded his head slightly and let her pass. Qing Lanfei's head leaned on the girl's shoulder throughout the entire scenario, her eyes wide as she watched the whole thing, and was unable to utter a single word. Ge was afraid that the woman might get too nervous and come to give the game away, so she sealed her movement acupoint. Besides leaning weakly on her as she shuffled along, the woman was unable to do anything else. So the two of them slowly left the frightening place that the flame-devouring ice demon was, away from that terrifying prison. Not even in her dreams would Qing Lanfei ever imagine that she would be able to see the light of day again. But she did not know for how long that moment would last, as she expected that she would be discovered very quickly, and would be recaptured in no time at all. This time, she has really dragged Ge down with her. It was not known how long they had walked, before Ge released the sealed acupoint on her body and said, Now go quickly. She raised a hand and pointed a finger before her, towards a tiny path that was filled with vegetation covered in white needle-shaped leaves. Just go straight from here. This is a place that the Mind-Free Peak is unable to watch over, and no one will know about this. To some people, this can be a path that leads to life, a way out from here, but also a path that leads to certain death for others. After Ge said that, she turned to look at Qing Lanfei and said, But I believe that Senior is always someone whom luck smiles upon all the time, and you will definitely be able to turn calamity into blessings. Qing Lanfei's fingers tightened up into fists, a crease knitting up her brows as she said haltingly, Ge, I can't leave. The guard at the flame-devouring ice demon had seen that it was Ge who brought her out of the place. When they came to discover that the girl had let her escape, she really could not imagine the consequences the girl would come to face. The punishment the Mind-Free Peak metes out to traitors is unimaginably cruel, and she cannot be so selfish. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although she was really worried about Jing Yu and the others, how could she possibly throw her junior, whom she grew up with together, into such horrible danger? Why are you still hesitating? Ge became a little anxious, and she stretched her hands out to push the woman. Better go right now. When they discover something is amiss, you will then be unable to leave. Qing Lanfei's feet staggered for a moment, but she still shook her head stubbornly. I am not leaving. If I leave, you will die. My death means nothing at all. It's just one life after all. He laughed a little self-mockingly. If not for how Senior had protected me back in those years, with the unlikable personality I have, I would have already died a countless number of times. Now that I can save you with my life in exchange, just take it as repayment for the debt I've owed you for so many years. Chapter 308. 1. Senior, you must go on to live a good life. Qing Lanfei's body stiffened up. She seemed to realize something suddenly after she heard those words. The shade on her face then changed slightly as her eyes widened incredulously in disbelief. Ge, Has your intentions right from the very beginning been to give up your own life? As the words to Qing Lanfei's question sounded out, Inge seemed to become startled, and the corner of her mouth twitched momentarily. She lowered her eyes in helplessness, and then said, "Senior, don't probe any further. You promised me before that you will go on to live a happy life, together with my share of happiness." Immediately after she said that, without even waiting for Inge to respond, a gentle force spilled out from Ingji's palm that softly pushed the woman deep into where the tiny path led to. Qing Lanfei's cultivation had not fully recovered, and it happened when her guard was down, so she was pushed back a few hundred meters, as Inge watched the figure of the woman slowly grow smaller bit by bit. "Inge, what audacity! You actually dared to let her go?" A highly infuriated voice suddenly sounded from a distance away, and the expression on Qing Lanfei's face froze. It was her master, deity Yanpo's voice. "She has been discovered so quickly?" Qing Lanfei turned her head in fright to look, and saw Yanpo with about 10 highly skilled experts behind her. A sharp command from Yanpo in a cold, icy voice quickly sent those figures darting out immediately, lunging straight towards Qing Lanfei, in quick pursuit of the escaped fugitive. However, Inge was a step ahead as she went to block their way forward, and gathered all her power in her to weave an enormous web, stopping the experts in their tracks. Her face became incredibly pale, and it seemed like it was taking a great toll on her. However, she gritted her teeth and shouted out with all her might, "Run!" Qing Lanfei clenched up her fists, and she was still hesitating, when a bout of bone-chilling laughter broke out in contempt, and Yanpo's voice then rang out in a completely emotionless tone. "Great! This is just great! What deep bonds of sisterhood you two share. I have really underestimated you, it seems, seeing that you are always quiet as a mouse and always so obedient. I had not thought that you can actually be so bold. Have you ever considered the consequences of your actions here? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Inge knows that what she did is unpardonable, and I only hope that Master will spare Senior just this once, on account of the fact that she was once your disciple." Inge spoke slowly, pausing at each word that came out of her mouth. A sliver of blood trickled slowly down from a corner of her lips. With just her powers alone, she was stretched to her limits, having to hold back so many highly skilled pugilists, and she would not be able to sustain it very much longer, but she would never give up. Until the very absolute last moment. The scorn on Yanpo's face grew deeper. "Since you're still unrepentant, persisting in the error of your ways even when death is upon you, there is no need for me to keep you with me any longer." You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.